Thursday, 6:47 inches the morning. I was lacing up my work boots on the front porch, thermos balanced on the railing, when my aunt's car rolled slowly past and then stopped. She lived 3 blocks over and walked the neighborhood every morning, rain or shine, had done it for 30 years. But she never stopped at my house like that. Not without calling first. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, engine running, and I could see her through the windshield just staring at me. Then she turned off the car and got out, and I knew right away that something was wrong. She was wearing her church clothes on a Thursday. That alone told me she'd been sitting with something heavy. I walked down the porch steps. She met me halfway up the driveway and took both my hands in hers before she even said hello. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to hear me before you say a word." I nodded. She looked over her shoulder, then back at me. Her eyes were red around the edges like she hadn't slept. "When you go on your work trips," she said quietly, "your brother comes here. I've seen his truck. I've seen it in the driveway after midnight, and I've seen it still there when the sun comes up. Baby, it's been happening since at least the spring." I stood very still. The morning was cool. A dog was barking 2 streets over. My brother. My younger brother, who I'd co-signed an apartment for when he was 22, who I'd driven to the hospital when he broke his collarbone, who stood beside me at my wedding 4 years ago and gave a toast that made my wife's mother cry. That brother. "Are you certain?" I asked. She squeezed my hands. "I wouldn't be standing here in my good shoes on a Thursday if I wasn't." I thanked her, hugged her, watched her drive away. Then I went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table with my thermos, and didn't move for 11 minutes. I counted them on the microwave clock. My wife was still asleep. I could hear the fan running in the bedroom. I didn't cry. I didn't knock anything over. I just sat there and let the information settle into me like concrete finding its level. By the time I drove to work, I had already decided not to react. Not yet. What I had instead was a question. And a question like that deserves a real answer. Not a screaming match in the kitchen based on a neighbor's account. No matter how much I trusted her. I needed to see it myself. I needed something that couldn't be argued with, explained away, or reframed as a misunderstanding. That evening, I called a guy I'd worked with on a job site 2 years back. He did security installations on the side, residential systems, discrete setups. I told him I had some concerns about package theft and wanted interior and exterior coverage. He came the next day while my wife was at her spin class. 3 cameras. Living room, kitchen, entryway. No blinking lights. No visible hardware. He was in and out in under 2 hours. I'd already had a work trip scheduled for the following week. A project site out in Columbus, 4 days. I kept my mouth shut about the cameras. I kissed my wife goodbye on Sunday afternoon the same way I always did. She was in the kitchen making a grocery list, hair up, half watching something on the tablet. She smiled without looking away from the screen and told me to text when I landed. I drove 40 minutes out of town, checked into a motel off the highway, and opened my laptop. The camera app loaded clean. 3 split-screen feeds, sharp resolution, timestamp running in the corner of each one. My house, my living room, my kitchen. All of it quiet and lit by Sunday afternoon light. I ordered a pizza I didn't eat and watched the feeds until midnight. Nothing. My wife moved through the house the way she always did, TV on low, lights off room by room as she went to bed. Monday passed the same way. Tuesday night, at 10:22 p.m., a pair of headlights swept across the entryway camera. I sat up straight. The front porch light came on. My wife had turned it on from the inside, which meant she was expecting someone. The door opened before anyone knocked. My brother walked in carrying a 6-pack and a paper bag from a Thai place we used to go to together when we were in our 20s. He set both things on my kitchen counter. My wife hugged him. Not the way you hug family at a holiday. The way you hug someone you've been waiting for. Her arms went around his neck and stayed there. I watched the whole thing, every second of it. The way he made himself at home in my kitchen, opening my cabinets for glasses without asking. The way she laughed at something he said and touched his arm. The way all of it looked completely practiced. Comfortable. Old. I closed the laptop at 2 a.m. and lay on the motel bed staring at the ceiling. The thing that kept circling in my mind wasn't the anger, though that was there, sitting heavy and low in my chest. It was the timeline. She'd said spring. My aunt had seen his truck since at least the spring. That was 8 months ago at minimum. 8 months of Sunday dinners where my brother sat across from me and asked about the project in Dayton. 8 months of my wife telling me she loved me at the end of phone calls while his truck was in my driveway. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Made over and over again. I didn't go back home that week. I stayed in the motel, went to the job site during the day, and spent my evenings making a list. Not an angry list. A strategic one. Because I'd learned something by then, somewhere between the age of 25 when I would have put my fist through a wall and 31 where I stood now, and what I'd learned was this: the people who lose control are the ones who lose everything else too. I was not going to lose everything else. First thing Wednesday morning I called my bank. I moved the majority of what was in our joint account into a separate personal account. I opened right there on the phone. Not all of it. Just enough that she'd notice something was off, but not enough to tip her into crisis mode before I was ready. I left $2,000 in the joint account, enough to look like an oversight. Then I called my attorney. I'd used him twice before, once for a contract dispute on a job site, once when I bought my truck. He was steady, practical, and he didn't ask unnecessary questions. I told him I needed to understand my options. He told me to come in Friday morning and bring documentation. I had plenty of documentation. I downloaded the footage and saved it to an encrypted drive. Time-stamped clips from 3 separate nights. Not just Tuesday. By Thursday he was back again, walking in the same way, leaving the same way. Just before 6 in the morning. I had it all. Audio, video, angles. I burned a copy to a second drive and mailed it to my attorney's office before I even left Columbus. Friday, I drove home like any other return from a work trip. Grabbed coffee at the usual exit, pulled into the driveway at the usual time. My wife was at the kitchen table with her laptop. She looked up and smiled. "Home early," she said. "Project wrapped faster than expected," I said. She got up and hugged me. I hugged her back. She smelled like the shampoo she'd used since we started dating. I held that detail in my chest and let it harden into something useful. We ate dinner together that night. She made pasta. We talked about her week, her sister's new apartment, a show she'd started watching. I listened to all of it. I asked follow-up questions. I poured her more wine when her glass got low. I was present in the way that people are when they're studying something for the last time. That night in bed, I stared at the dark and made my final list. Saturday morning, she went to her spin class. The moment her car left the driveway, I moved through the house with purpose. I photographed everything of value. Art, jewelry she'd brought into the marriage. Furniture she'd purchased before we met. I documented what was mine, what was ours, and what had always been hers alone. I sent those photos to my attorney in a labeled folder. Then I went to my brother's workplace. He managed inventory at a distribution warehouse on the east side of the city. I knew the HR director there because we'd done a renovation on the building's east wing 2 summers ago. I didn't go in to cause a scene. I went in with a flash drive and a business card and asked the receptionist if I could leave something for the HR director with a note that it was time-sensitive and confidential. She said she'd make sure it got delivered. I wrote on the note, "This involves a conduct matter regarding one of your employees. The attached files are dated and verified. I am available by phone if needed." I didn't sign it with my name. I didn't need to. I drove home and spent the afternoon doing nothing in particular. Fixed the loose hinge on the back gate. Watched a game. Let the day move at its own pace. My wife came home around 4, made tea. Settled into the couch beside me like everything was normal. Because for her, it still was. Sunday, I drove 3 blocks over and knocked on my aunt's door. She opened it and looked at me for a long moment, reading my face. "I know," I said. "I've seen it. I'm handling it." She put her hand on my cheek the way she used to when I was a kid. "Come inside," she said. I made soup. I sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours. She didn't ask for details. She didn't offer opinions about what I should do. She fed me and let me be quiet, and that was the most human I'd felt in 2 weeks. Before I left, I told her that she'd done the right thing by telling me. That it had taken courage to walk up that driveway. She shook her head. "It took love," she said. "Courage would have been sooner." I drove home with something settled in me. A kind of clearness. Monday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't have saved. It took me a second to realize it was a work number from my brother's company. The message said simply, "Your submission has been received and is under review. Thank you." By 2 p.m., I got a call from my brother. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that said he was having a weird day and just wanted to talk. His voice was flat in a way that told me he already knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong yet. I didn't call back. Tuesday evening, I sat in my home office and watched the entryway camera feed in real time. He didn't show up. My wife moved through the house restless, checking her phone more than usual. She came to the office doorway at one point and asked if I wanted to watch something together. I told her I had a few more things to finish. She said okay and drifted back down the hall. The air in the house had changed. Not because of anything I'd said. Because of what I hadn't said. People who have something to hide are extraordinarily sensitive to shifts in atmosphere. She could feel that something was different in me. She just couldn't name it yet. Wednesday morning, I called my brother back. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey," I said. "You called?" Yeah, he paused. "You doing okay?" "I'm good," I said. "Busy week." "What's up?" "I might be losing my job," he said. "There was some kind of complaint filed. They won't tell me the details. HR called me in yesterday." I made a sound that I hoped conveyed appropriate concern. "That's rough. Do you know what it's about?" "No," he said. "It came out of nowhere." "I'm sure it'll get sorted out," I said. "Keep me posted." We hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I finished my coffee and went to meet with my attorney. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. He'd reviewed everything I'd sent. He walked me through the process, what the filing would look like, what I was entitled to, what I could reasonably expect given the length of the marriage and the assets involved. He had questions. I had answers. By the end, we had a clear timeline and a draft that would be ready within the week. He asked me once, calmly, if I was certain. If I'd thought it through completely. I told him I'd been thinking about almost nothing else for 2 weeks. He nodded and said, "Then let's make sure it's airtight." Thursday night, I got home late from a site visit. My wife had already eaten. She was in the living room with the TV on, but the volume was low and she wasn't really watching. She looked up when I came in. "Can we talk?" she said. "Sure," I said. I set down my bag and sat in the chair across from her. Not on the couch beside her. The chair. She looked at her hands. "Is everything okay with us?" she asked. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. You seem distant. You've seemed off for a couple of weeks." I nodded slowly. "I've had a lot on my mind," I said. "Is it work?" "Partly." She looked at me. "Is there something you want to say to me?" I held her gaze for a moment. "There's actually quite a bit I want to say," I said. "But not tonight. Tonight I'm tired. We'll talk soon." She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded. I went to bed before her. I lay in the dark and listened to the TV, murmuring down the hall, and thought about the version of myself that would have never seen this coming. The guy who co-signed his brother's apartment and cried a little at his own wedding. That guy was still in there somewhere. But he'd had to step back and let someone steadier take the wheel for a while. Friday afternoon, the papers arrived at my attorney's office. He called to confirm. Everything was signed on my end, notarized, ready. That evening, I called my brother and asked if he wanted to come over for dinner Saturday. He hesitated for just a second, then said sure, yeah, that'd be good. He sounded relieved. Like he thought things might be getting back to normal. "Good," I said. "Come around 7. I'll pick up steaks." I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment. My wife was in the bedroom. The house was quiet. I walked to the media console in the living room, pulled out the small HDMI drive I'd prepared, and set it beside the TV remote. I'd loaded it with a single folder. 4 video clips. Clean cuts, no commentary needed. Saturday I did everything I said I would. Picked up steaks from the butcher we'd been going to for years. Stopped for a bottle of bourbon. Came home and prepped everything the way I always did when we had someone over for dinner. My wife helped without being asked, same as always. She seemed lighter, like the tension of the past week had lifted a little. She thought the invitation meant things were fine. He arrived at 7:06. I heard my wife's voice change when she answered the door, a very slight tightening. She'd been nervous all day in a way she was trying to hide from me, and now I understood why. She didn't know what I knew. But she knew that something had shifted, and having the two of us in the same room was a variable she hadn't accounted for. I came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder and shook my brother's hand. He shook back, smiled, looked me in the eyes a half second too long. "Checking for something." "Good to see you," I said. "Glad you could make it." "Yeah," he said. "Wouldn't miss it." We ate. The food was good. I kept the conversation moving, asked him about the situation at work, how it was progressing. He said HR still hadn't given him details, but he was hopeful. I said I was sure it would resolve itself. My wife was quiet through most of dinner, refilling her water glass twice without touching the bourbon I'd poured her. After we cleared the plates, I told them to go sit in the living room. I'd bring the drinks out. I heard them settle onto the couch. Heard the particular silence that falls between two people who have things to say to each other but can't. I walked in, set the glasses down, picked up the remote, and turned on the TV. Then I plugged in the drive. The first clip was 12 seconds. Time-stamped. My entryway camera. My brother walking through my front door at 10:31 p.m. On a Tuesday in September, no one in the room made a sound. The second clip was longer. The kitchen. Both of them. I didn't need to say what it showed. My brother stood up. His chair scraped back loud in the quiet room. My wife put her face in her hands. I turned off the TV, set the remote down on the coffee table, and sat across from them in the armchair. Same chair as Thursday night. I want you to know, I said, that I've watched all of it. I know the timeline. I know how long it's been going on. And I've spent the last 2 weeks getting everything in order, legally and financially, before I said a single word to either of you. My brother started talking. I let him get about 4 words out. I don't need an explanation, I said. I needed evidence. I have it. I needed documentation. I have that too. I needed to protect myself before either of you realized I knew. And I've done that. He went quiet. My wife lifted her face from her hands. She was crying. Her eyes were red and her voice cracked when she said my name. Don't, I said. Not right now. I stood up and walked to the console again. I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the coffee table. Those are for you, I told my wife. My attorney prepared them. Everything is straightforward. I've already signed. She stared at the envelope like it was something that had materialized from another dimension. I looked at my brother. You and I said, are done. That's not a decision I'm making in anger right now. I've had 2 weeks to sit with it and it's still true. We're done. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I walked to the front door and opened it. I left it open. Then I went back to the kitchen, picked up the keys to my truck, and walked through the living room without stopping. I glanced at my wife once as I passed. She was sitting very still, the envelope in her hands, still unopened. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. I stepped out into the night. The air was cold and clean. The neighborhood was quiet, just porch lights and distant traffic. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a moment, not going anywhere yet, just breathing. My phone lit up. Texts. Both of them. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. I thought about my aunt in her church clothes on a Thursday morning, holding my hands in the driveway and not looking away. I thought about how she said it wasn't courage, it was love. I thought about the difference between those two things and how long it had taken me to understand that loving someone and protecting yourself were not in conflict. That clarity was not the same thing as coldness. I started the truck and drove to my aunt's house. It was past 9. Her lights were still on. I sat in her driveway for a minute before going to the door. She answered before I knocked, like she'd heard the engine. She looked at my face. Stepped back to let me in. Is it done? She asked. It's done, I said. She made decaf. We sat at the kitchen table the same way we had the week before, except quieter this time. She didn't fill the silence with anything. She just sat with me in it the way only someone who's known you your whole life can do. At some point she said, "You're going to be all right?" "I know," I said. And I meant it. Not because the next few months were going to be easy. They weren't. There would be calls from my mother, who wouldn't understand why I wouldn't just try to work things out. There would be mutual friends who'd take sides poorly and acquaintances who'd offer opinions nobody asked for. There would be paperwork and logistics and the particular exhaustion of dismantling a life that had been 4 years in the building. But underneath all of that was something solid. The knowledge that I had not panicked. I had not reacted. I had not handed either of them the satisfaction of watching me come apart. I had moved quietly and carefully and with precision. And I had handled the thing that needed handling before it could handle me first. My attorney called Monday morning with an update. My wife had contacted her own attorney over the weekend. Things were in motion. He told me to expect the process to take 3 to 4 months, maybe less given the straightforward nature of the assets. I thanked him, hung up, and drove to the job site. My crew was already there. Coffee, blueprints, the sound of equipment. I walked the perimeter of the build, checked the morning's progress, signed off on a materials delivery. Work moved at the same pace it always had. Solid and indifferent and reliable in the way that physical things tend to be. Around noon I got a voicemail from my brother. He said he wanted to explain himself. That I deserved to hear his side. That he never meant for things to go the way they did. I listened to the whole message. Then I deleted it. Not because I was still too angry to hear him. But because there was nothing in any explanation that would change the 2 weeks I'd spent in that motel with a laptop and an encrypted drive and a very specific understanding of who the people I trusted most had chosen to be. He had a side. I didn't need it. What I needed, and what I was slowly building back, was a version of my life that made sense to me. One where the people in it had earned their place there. One where I could come home at the end of a long day and not wonder what was happening in my absence. I called my aunt that evening just to talk. She told me about her garden, what she was planting for spring. She told me her neighbor's dog had finally stopped getting into her trash. Small things, ordinary things. The kind of conversation that reminds you that the world is still mostly made of normal, quiet days. Before I hung up, she said, "You know, your grandfather used to say that dignity is what you have left when everything else gets stripped away." She paused. "You still have yours. That matters more than you think right now." I sat in my truck in a parking lot outside a hardware store and held the phone for a moment after the call ended. The sun was going down. The parking lot lights were flickering on one by one. My grandfather had built his own house with his hands, raised 3 kids in it, buried his wife from it. He told me once, when I was maybe 12, that the most important thing a man could do in his life was learn the difference between what he deserved and what he was willing to put up with. That most people spent their whole lives confusing the two. I understood that now in a way I hadn't at 12. In a way, honestly, that I hadn't even understood 2 months ago. There's a version of me that stays in that house. That has the fight. That spends months going in circles trying to figure out whether something broken can be repaired and whether broken people change and whether love is sometimes just stubbornness wearing a nicer coat. I know that version. I understand him. But that version ends up hollowed out in ways that take years to recover from. This version drove to a motel and opened a laptop and made a list. I'm not going to pretend that the hurt wasn't there. It was. It sat in my chest for weeks like something calcified. The weight of realizing that the 2 people you trusted most had looked at each other and then looked at you and made a choice. Again and again and again. That kind of betrayal doesn't just sting. It rewrites things. It makes you go back through old memories with new light and wonder what was real and what was performance. But here's what I also knew. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had loved my wife genuinely. I had been a good brother. I had shown up and been present and invested in those relationships without reservation. The fact that they had chosen to betray that wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of theirs. And I was going to carry that knowledge forward instead of the wound. 3 weeks after that Saturday dinner, I signed the lease on a new apartment. 2nd floor, big windows, south-facing. Sparse furniture at first because I'd left most of the shared stuff behind. A few boxes, a mattress, my tools, my grandfather's watch that I'd kept in my coat pocket since he died. The first night there, I sat on the floor of the empty living room with a beer and listened to the building settle around me. It was a Thursday, early November. The radiator clicked. Someone upstairs walked across the floor in heavy shoes. I thought about my aunt in her driveway on a different Thursday morning not that long ago, holding my hands, pale and shaking in her church clothes. The thing she'd done took more than most people would have managed. She'd weighed the comfort of staying quiet against the cost of my not knowing, and she'd chosen honesty even though it was going to hurt someone she loved. I made a note in my phone to stop by her house that weekend. I was going to bring flowers and a real bottle of wine, not the cheap stuff. And I was going to sit at her kitchen table and tell her that what she did mattered. That it changed the shape of how things went. That because of a Thursday morning in a driveway, I had walked into this with my eyes open instead of my eyes closed, and there was a meaningful difference between those 2 things. The radiator clicked again. The building settled. Outside, a car moved slow through the street below, headlights sliding across the ceiling. I finished the beer. Sat in the quiet for a while longer. My name is my own again, in the way that names sometimes stop being yours when they get tangled up with someone else's story. And the story I'm in now, the one I'm writing going forward, is one where I know the difference between what I deserve and what I was willing to put up with. My grandfather would have understood.